Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow, check your bank account, and you have $800. Just 800. Now imagine that 2 weeks later, that same account shows $350 million. Not through inheritance, not through lottery, through 126 consecutive perfect stock trades. 0 losses, 0 mistakes. Perfect. That's not just luck. That's not even possible. The greatest investors in history, the legends, the geniuses who spent decades mastering the market, they can't do that. Warren Buffett can't do that. Nobody can do that. The mathematical probability of making 126 winning trades in a row is so astronomically small that it essentially equals 0. It's like flipping a coin and getting heads 126 times consecutively. It doesn't happen, but it did happen. And when the FBI finally caught the man who did it, when they sat him down in that cold interrogation room and demanded answers, what he told them didn't just shock them, it terrified them. Because he didn't claim to be a genius. He didn't claim to have some algorithm or insider information. He said something far more disturbing. He said he came from the year 2256, and the details he provided made it impossible to simply laugh him off. His name was Andrew Carlson. And before you decide whether you believe his story or not, you need to hear what happened. Because this case, whether it's the greatest financial fraud in history or actual proof of time travel, raises questions that will make you question everything you think you know about time, reality, and what's possible. Stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you gets stranger with every detail. And by the end of this video, you're going to have to make a choice about what you believe. But I promise you this, you won't forget the story. Let's go back to early 2003. The world is still reeling from the aftermath of 9/11. The stock market is volatile, unpredictable, dangerous. Investors are losing millions. Companies are collapsing. It's financial chaos. And in the middle of all this chaos, someone, somewhere, is making perfect trades. Every single one. Up when they should go up. Out before the crash. In before the surge. Flawless. The Securities and Exchange Commission notices. Of course they notice. When someone is defying every statistical model, every algorithmic prediction, every pattern, they notice. They start investigating. And what they find is a man named Andrew Carlson. No significant financial history. No background in trading. No connections to major firms. Just a regular account that, 2 weeks ago, had $800. And now, $350 million. They bring him in. Federal agents, SEC investigators, financial analysts, everyone wants answers. They sit him down and they ask him the obvious question. How? How did you do this? What's your secret? Who's feeding you information? What insider connections do you have? And Carlson, calm, completely unfazed, tells him something nobody expected. He says, I'm from the year 2256. I know what happens because for me, it already happened. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, obviously he's lying. Obviously, this is some elaborate cover story to hide the real method, the real conspiracy. And that's exactly what the investigators thought too, at first. But then he started talking. And the things he said, the details he provided, the knowledge he demonstrated, it didn't add up to a simple lie. He described future events with specificity, not vague predictions. Specific dates, specific outcomes, specific details. He talked about technological advancements that didn't exist yet, scientific breakthroughs that hadn't been made, geopolitical shifts that seemed absurd at the time. And here's the thing, some of those things later happened. Not all of them. We can't verify everything he said, but enough to make people pause. Enough to make them wonder. But it gets stranger. Because Carlson didn't just claim to be from the future. He offered proof. He offered information. He told investigators. He knew exactly where Osama bin Laden was hiding. Remember, this is 2003. The most wanted man in the world. The largest manhunt in history. And Carlson said, I know where he is. I can tell you. He also claimed to know the cure for diseases that were, at that time, considered incurable. He said he had knowledge of events that were going to unfold, tragedies that could be prevented, opportunities that could be seized. And then he made them an offer. He said, let me go, let me return to my time, and I'll give you one piece of information. Just one. Something that will prove I'm telling the truth. Something that will change everything. But you have to let me go. Think about that for a moment. Put yourself in that room. You're an FBI agent. You've just listened to this man claim he's from 250 years in the future. Every instinct tells you he's lying. Every rational bone in your body says this is impossible. But then you look at his trading record. 126 consecutive perfect trades. And you think, what if? What if he's telling the truth? What if this is real? What do? The investigators faced an impossible decision. If Carlson was lying, he was the most sophisticated con artist they'd ever encountered. If he was telling the truth, they were looking at the first confirmed case of time travel in human history. Either way, they couldn't let him go. Not yet. Not until they understood what they were dealing with. So they kept him in custody. They scheduled a court hearing. They prepared to dig deeper, to investigate every claim, every detail, every impossible trade. But here's where the story takes its darkest turn. Because Andrew Carlson never made it to that hearing. The night before he was supposed to appear in court, he vanished. Not escaped. Vanished. No signs of forced exit. No broken locks. No alarms triggered. Security footage from that night showed nothing unusual. One moment he was in his cell. The next moment, the cell was empty. Guards checked. Supervisors reviewed the footage. Investigators tore the facility apart, looking for evidence of how he got out. Nothing. Andrew Carlson simply ceased to be there. Now, the official story, the one that circulated quietly in law enforcement circles, was that he was released on bail by an unknown benefactor who posted $1 million and then never appeared again. But think about that. Who posts $1 million bail for someone claiming to be a time traveler? Who has that kind of money and that kind of interest? And more importantly, how does someone disappear so completely that not a single trace of them exists after that night? Some say he went back to 2256, that he completed whatever mission brought him here and returned to his own time. Others say he was silenced, that government agencies realized he knew too much, that his claims were too dangerous, and he was taken somewhere nobody would ever find him. And some, the skeptics, say he never existed at all, that the whole story was a hoax, an internet legend, a modern myth designed to make us question reality. But here's what we know for certain. The trading records existed. The SEC investigation was real. The financial anomaly happened. Whether the man was really named Andrew Carlson, whether he really claimed to be from the future, whether any of the specific details are accurate, those things are harder to verify. The story spread through news outlets, through internet forums, through whispered conversations in financial districts. And like all stories that touch on time travel, it took on a life of its own. So let me ask you something. Let's say, just for a moment, that Andrew Carlson was telling the truth. Let's say he really was from 2256. Why would he come back to 2003? What possible reason would someone from that far in the future have to travel back to our time and make $350 million in the stock market? Think about it. If you had access to time travel, if you could go anywhere, anywhen, would you really use that technology to play the stock market? Unless the money wasn't the point. Unless the money was a means to an end. Carlson himself hinted at this. He said the money was necessary to prevent something catastrophic. He didn't elaborate. He didn't explain what catastrophic event he was trying to stop. But he made it clear that his presence in 2003 had a purpose beyond personal gain. So what was he trying to prevent? What event? What decision? What moment in history was so important that it required someone to travel back 250 years to intervene? This is where the story becomes less about Andrew Carlson and more about the nature of time itself. Because if time travel is possible, if someone can move backward through the centuries, then everything we think we know about cause and effect gets turned upside down. The future isn't set. The past isn't immutable. Every decision, every action, every moment becomes a potential pivot point for the entire timeline. Physicists have theorized about this for decades. The grandfather paradox, the butterfly effect, Temporal loops. The idea that changing even the smallest detail in the past could create ripples that alter the entire future. So if Carlson really was from 2256, and if he really did come back to change something, then his very presence here created a paradox. Because the future he came from might no longer exist. The timeline he knew might have been erased the moment he arrived. Some researchers call this the self-negating time travel problem. If you go back in time to prevent a disaster, and you succeed, then the future version of you has no reason to go back in time because the disaster never happened. So did you ever go back? Did the disaster ever exist? It's a loop with no beginning and no end. It's a puzzle that breaks logic. And here's the terrifying part. If Carlson succeeded in his mission, if he prevented whatever catastrophe he came back to stop, we would never know. Because from our perspective, that catastrophe never happened. We're living in the timeline he created, the one where the disaster was averted, and we have no memory of the original timeline. We can't, because we never experienced it. That version of reality was erased. Think about that. Really think about it. What if there have been dozens of time travelers? What if our history, the one we learn in school, the one we think we know, has been edited and re-edited by people from the future, correcting mistakes, preventing disasters, altering outcomes? We would never know. Every change would be seamless because we would only remember the new version. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds like science fiction. This sounds impossible. And maybe it is. Maybe Andrew Carlson was just a very clever fraudster who found a way to manipulate the system and then escape before he could be fully prosecuted. Maybe the time travel claim was just a smokescreen, a distraction, a way to muddy the waters and make the investigation more complicated. That's possible. That's rational. That makes sense. But it doesn't explain the trades. It doesn't explain 126 consecutive wins. Even the best insider information in the world can't give you that kind of success rate. Markets are chaotic systems. They're influenced by millions of variables, human emotions, unexpected events, random fluctuations. No amount of knowledge can predict them with 100% accuracy unless you already know the outcome, unless you've already seen it happen. And it doesn't explain his knowledge of other events. The things he said about future developments, the details he provided that later turned out to be true. Coincidence? Maybe. Lucky guesses? Possibly. Or maybe, just maybe, he really did know, because he'd already lived through it. Let me share something else with you. Something that makes this even more intriguing. After Carlson disappeared, people started digging into his background, try to find out who he really was, where he came from, what his real identity might be. And what they found was strange. There were almost no records of Andrew Carlson existing before 2003. No birth certificate that could be definitively linked to him. No school records. No employment history. It was as if he appeared out of nowhere, made his trades, told his story, and vanished back into nowhere. Now, you could argue that he was using a false identity, that Andrew Carlson wasn't his real name, that he constructed a fake persona specifically for this operation, and that's entirely plausible. People create false identities all the time for various reasons, legal and illegal, but the absence of records is still notable, because in the modern world, it's incredibly difficult to exist without leaving a trail. We're all in databases, systems, records. The fact that Carlson had so little traceable history is unusual. There's another detail that often gets overlooked in this story. When Carlson was first arrested, investigators found several items in his possession that they couldn't immediately identify. Small electronic devices that didn't match any known technology at the time. Now, this detail is less confirmed than others. It comes from secondary sources rather than official reports, but multiple accounts mention that these devices puzzled the people who examined them. Were they just prototypes? Experimental tech from some private company? Or were they something more? We can't know for certain. Those devices, if they existed, were never released to the public, never analyzed by independent researchers. They disappeared into the same black hole that swallowed Andrew Carlson himself, which, depending on your perspective, either proves they were nothing important or suggests they were extremely important. Here's where I want to talk directly to you, to everyone watching this right now. Whether you believe Carlson was a time traveler or not, his story forces us to confront some profound questions. Questions about the nature of time, the limits of knowledge, and the possibility that reality is far stranger than we've been taught to believe. What would you do if you could travel through time? Would you use it to get rich? To change history? To prevent tragedies? Or would you simply observe, careful not to disturb the timeline? And if you met someone who claimed to be from the future, what would it take to convince you? What evidence would you need? Because the truth is, proving time travel is almost impossible. Any technology from the future would seem like magic to us. Any knowledge of future events could be explained away as lucky guesses or insider information. The burden of proof is so high that even a real time traveler might not be able to meet it. And that brings us to the uncomfortable possibility that time travelers could be among us right now, walking the streets, living ordinary lives, carefully avoiding paradoxes and keeping their origins secret. Because if they revealed themselves, if they tried to prove what they were, they'd face exactly what Carlson faced: interrogation, imprisonment, disbelief, maybe worse. So maybe the smart time travelers, the ones who don't get caught, are the ones who blend in, who never make 126 perfect trades, who never claim to know where wanted criminals are hiding, who simply exist quietly, doing whatever they came here to do, and then leaving without anyone ever knowing they were different. The Andrew Carlson case, whether true or false, is a mirror. It reflects our deepest fascinations and our deepest fears about time. The fascination that maybe, just maybe, the future has already been written and someone has read it. The fear that if time travel is possible, then nothing is permanent. Not our choices, not our history, not even our existence. There's a philosophical concept called temporal narcissism. It's the idea that we assume our present moment is special, that we're living in the definitive version of history. But if time can be traveled, then every moment is equally fluid. The past can be changed, the future can be rewritten, and the present, this moment right now, is just one possible configuration of events among infinite possibilities. Let me ask you something else. If you had the knowledge Carlson claimed to have, if you knew the future, would you use it? Would you trade stocks? Would you warn people about disasters? Would you try to change things? Or would you let events unfold as they're meant to? It's easy to say you'd be noble, that you'd use that knowledge for good, but the temptation would be enormous. The power to know what's coming, to position yourself perfectly, to avoid every mistake and seize every opportunity. Could you resist that? And here's the darker question. If Carlson was real, if he was from 2256, what does that say about our future? What does it say that someone from that time chose to come back here, to our era, to 2003? What's so important about this period in history? What decisions are we making right now, or what events are unfolding right now that matters so much 250 years from now? Maybe it's technology. Maybe this era, the early 21st century, is when we make the crucial choices about artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, space exploration, the foundations that will determine what the world looks like in 2256. Maybe Carlson came back to nudge those foundations, to prevent us from going down a dangerous path. Or maybe it's something else entirely, something we can't even imagine yet, because we're living in the middle of it. The story of Andrew Carlson has been debated for over 2 decades now. Skeptics point out the lack of verifiable evidence, the way the story spread primarily through internet forums and tabloid sources, the absence of official FBI reports confirming all the details. They argue it's an urban legend, a piece of modern folklore that grew in the telling. And they might be right, but believers point to the core anomaly, the trading record, the financial impossibility. They say that even if some details got exaggerated or misreported, something unusual happened. Someone made trades that defied explanation, and that someone disappeared under mysterious circumstances. They ask, if it was just fraud, why hasn't anyone been able to explain the method? Why hasn't anyone replicated it? Why did the investigation go quiet? Both sides have valid points. And that's what makes this case so compelling. It exists in that gray zone between possible and impossible, between explainable and mysterious. It's a story that refuses to be neatly categorized as true or false. I've spent a lot of time researching cases like this. Stories of people who appear out of nowhere with impossible knowledge. Individuals who seem displaced in time. And what strikes me is how many of these stories there are. Not just Andrew Carlson. There are dozens of accounts throughout history of people who didn't quite fit their era, who knew things they shouldn't know, who vanished without explanation. Most of them are forgotten. A few, like Carlson, become legends. Are they all frauds? All coincidences? All misunderstandings? Statistically, probably most of them are. But all of them? Every single one? That's harder to accept. Because the universe is stranger than we think. Quantum physics has already shown us that reality at the smallest scales doesn't follow the rules we learn in school. Particles can exist in multiple states simultaneously. They can be entangled across vast distances. They can tunnel through barriers that should be impenetrable. If the microscopic world is that weird, why assume the macroscopic world, the world of time and space and causality, is simple? Einstein showed us that time isn't constant. It's relative. It flows differently depending on speed and gravity. Astronauts on the space station age slightly slower than people on Earth because they're moving faster and experiencing less gravity. It's a tiny difference, microseconds, but it's real. Time dilation is proven. So we already know time can be manipulated. The question isn't whether time can bend. The question is whether it can bend enough to allow backward travel. Most physicists say no. They say the laws of thermodynamics, the arrow of time, causality itself, prevent backward time travel. They say it would require exotic matter, negative energy, conditions we can't create and might not even exist. They say the paradoxes are unsolvable, but some physicists disagree. Some point to solutions in Einstein's equations that theoretically allow for closed time-like curves, paths through space-time that loop back on themselves, wormholes, rotating black holes, Alcubierre drives, mathematical possibilities that haven't been ruled out. We don't know. That's the honest answer. We don't know if time travel is possible. We don't know if it will ever be possible. And we don't know if someone from the future has already figured out and visited us. What we do know is that Andrew Carlson's story, whether factual or fictional, touches something deep in the human psyche. The desire to control time, the fear of losing control, the hope that mistakes can be undone, the terror that our choices might not matter because someone else is rewriting the timeline. Before we finish, I want to come back to the money. $350 million. From 800 in 2 weeks. Let's say you had that money right now. What would you do with it? Buy houses? Cars? Invest it? Give it away? Carlson said the money was necessary to prevent something catastrophic, but he never got to use it. He was arrested before he could deploy it for whatever purpose he intended. So did he fail? Is there some catastrophe that happened because he was stopped? Or did his arrest itself somehow prevent the catastrophe in a way he didn't anticipate? Time travel stories always come back to this. The unpredictability of consequences. You go back to change one thing, and you end up changing everything. You try to prevent a disaster, and you cause a different one. It's chaos theory played out across centuries. And if Carlson was real, he was playing a game with rules we can't even comprehend. I want to hear from you. Do you think Andrew Carlson was a time traveler from 2256? Do you think he was a brilliant con artist? Do you think the story is completely fabricated? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you believe and why. Because this is a conversation worth having. This is a mystery worth exploring together. And if you're still watching, if you've made it this far, thank you. Thank you for being curious. Thank you for being willing to question. Thank you for exploring these strange corners of reality with me. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the Andrew Carlson case, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel because we're going to keep investigating cases like this. Stories that challenge what we think we know. Mysteries that refuse to be solved. And maybe, just maybe, evidence that time is more flexible than we've been taught. One final thought. If Andrew Carlson really was from the future, and if he's watching this video right now from wherever or whenever he is, I have a message for him. We're listening. If you want to tell your story, if you want to explain what really happened, we're ready to hear it. And if you're still trying to prevent that catastrophe you mentioned, whatever it is, maybe it's time to try again. Because from where we're standing in 2024, the world could use someone who knows what's coming. Time keeps moving forward. Or does it? Maybe it moves in circles. Maybe it branches. Maybe it's all happening at once. And we just perceive it linearly because that's how our brains are wired. Maybe Andrew Carlson understood that. Maybe he saw time the way it really is, not as a river flowing one direction, but as an ocean where you can swim in any direction if you know how. The case remains open. Not officially, not in any FBI file, but in our collective imagination. And sometimes the cases that stay open are the most important ones, because they remind us that we don't have all the answers, that reality is bigger and stranger than our current understanding, that the impossible might just be the not yet explained. Keep questioning, keep wondering, keep looking for the truth, even when it hides in the shadows between what we know and what we believe. Because somewhere in those shadows, in stories like Andrew Carlson's, might be the key to understanding the universe in ways we never thought possible. Until next time, stay curious. And remember, the future is already written. The question is, who's holding the pen?